My name is Sarah and I am 22 years old. This story happened during the summer of 2018, when I was working for DoorDash to earn some extra money. DoorDash was something relatively new in my city at that time, so the system was not very well organized yet. DoorDash is a food delivery service that works with restaurants that do not have their own delivery service like McDonald's. That day, after making several deliveries, I decided to take one last order at 10 p.m., even though I was tired. I thought one more order wouldn't hurt. The order was at a nearby pizzeria, and the customer had ordered a medium pepperoni pizza with cheese, along with loaded fries as a side. It seemed a bit strange to me because this particular pizzeria already has its own delivery service. I thought maybe the customer had ordered through DoorDash because they thought it would be faster. I arrived at the pizzeria, picked up the order, and checked the app to make sure I had everything correct. After verifying that nothing was missing, I headed to the customer's address, which was in downtown. I also noticed that the customer had left special instructions in the app, asking me to call them when I arrived outside. It didn't seem odd to me, as many people request it, so I proceeded to drive to their house. Upon arrival, I parked next to the sidewalk in front of a tall and somewhat gloomy apartment building. It was already dark, and the place itself gave me an uneasy feeling. I felt a slight chill when I saw the building, and to be honest, I didn't want to approach it. I decided to stay in the car and call the number the customer had left. DoorDash has a feature to hide the caller's real number, which reassured me. The phone rang a couple of times before a woman answered. As soon as she responded, she started laughing in a very strange, almost disturbing way. In the background, I could hear another woman crying as if she was in danger or scared. That was when I truly started to feel fear. It wasn't normal laughter. There was something sinister in that woman's tone, and the crying in the background made the situation even more unsettling. Without thinking, I hung up immediately, and, as soon as I did, started the car and drove as fast as I could, without stopping to think about where I was going. After a few minutes of driving aimlessly, I found myself at a busy restaurant a few blocks away, and decided to stop in its parking lot to calm down and try to think clearly. Once parked, I opened the DoorDash app and contacted the help center. I quickly explained the situation because I feared I might get into trouble for not delivering the order. The customer service representative told me there was a 30-minute waiting period during which the customer could call or message me to ask about their food. If there was no communication after that time, I wouldn't have any problems. To my relief, the customer didn't contact me. After finishing the call, I called my mother. I was still very scared and told her what had just happened. At first, we both thought it might have been some sort of prank, but the more we analyzed it, the more disturbing it seemed. My mother suggested that I call the police to report the incident just in case. Finally, I called the non-emergency police line and explained everything that had happened. The officers who took my call thanked me and assured me they would perform a wellness check at the building, which made me feel a little more at ease. The next morning, I received a call from the police informing me that they had gone to the building the previous night but found nothing out of the ordinary. They tried calling the customer several times, but the phone was turned off. Additionally, 2 officers inspected each apartment to ensure everything was okay, but they didn't find anything unusual. Since that night, I decided to stop making night deliveries. Although the situation didn't escalate, I was left with a lingering feeling of fear and unease that still accompanies me. I don't know if it was a practical joke, some kind of misunderstanding, or something darker, but I chose not to take the risk again. This story happened when I was younger, around 13 years old. We lived in a house with a balcony that was connected to my room and my mother's room by large glass doors. The doors of my room faced the balcony, and the balcony, in turn, faced the street. We had 2 tall trees next to the terrace, and I used to climb them to go up and down to the balcony whenever I wanted. I remember one night my mother and my brother were out, leaving me alone at home. I was lying in bed with a small dim light on, reading a book. Suddenly, I heard a noise outside, as if something or someone was moving in one of the trees. I wasn't immediately alarmed, since in our area it was common to hear noises from raccoons or bats in the trees. However, something made me look towards the glass doors. Although I had curtains, they were quite thin and allowed the light from the streetlights to filter through. It was then that I saw a shadow slowly moving right in front of the doors. I stood still, trying to convince myself it was an illusion, but the shadow clearly took the shape of a person. By the height, I knew it wasn't a neighborhood kid or my mother, as it was much taller than either of them. As I watched in silence, I realized that the figure was trying to open the glass doors of my room. An indescribable terror swept over me. I didn't know if my mother had left them unlocked. In a state of panic, I silently slid out of bed and headed towards the door of my room to close and block it. I stood still, listening, and could hear the figure trying to open the glass doors. It seemed that they weren't giving up, and I felt a momentary relief thinking that at least the door was locked. Still, the intruder didn't give up. I heard light footsteps moving back to the other side of the balcony. Their shadow moved side to side in front of the doors, and suddenly I saw the shadow of a hand approaching the door handle, trying to open it again and again. At that moment, fear completely paralyzed me. I could only watch, with my heart pounding wildly. What seemed like hours passed. Then I heard the intruder say quietly, "I could just break the glass." I was terrified, but before I could react or think of what they might do, I saw the headlights of a car turning the corner. The intruder heard the car, and suddenly I heard a loud thud as they jumped off the balcony and fled. The car's lights were from my mother, who was returning home at that moment. When my mother entered, I broke down crying. I couldn't properly explain what had happened. I just kept repeating that someone had tried to enter the balcony. My mother, worried and trying to calm me down, immediately called the police. When they arrived, they asked some questions, inspected the area, and talked to the neighbors, but they never found anyone. A few days later, one of the neighbors mentioned having seen a suspicious van on the street that night. Apparently, it matched the description of a van that had been linked to attempted kidnappings near my school, which was only a block away from our house. The police suspected that the intruder might have been following me for some time, waiting for an opportunity to approach when I was alone. Since that day, my mother decided to take additional security measures, and I never felt the same in that house. The experience deeply marked me, and although years have passed, I still vividly remember that night and the fear I felt seeing that figure on the balcony, so close yet so terrifyingly unknown. There is something strange about the house next door, and I really don't know if I should do something about it. The house is large and old, and it has always given me a slightly unsettling feeling. It has been uninhabited for a long time, and although it has a beautiful architectural style, it looks neglected and somewhat eerie. The last owners began renovating it, but suddenly, they stopped the work and abandoned the house without giving any explanations. The house has changed owners several times in recent years, but no one seems to stay for long. Usually they buy it, live there for a couple of years, and then put it up for sale again. Since the last owners left and the repairs were left unfinished, the house has remained empty. About 6 weeks ago, I started noticing some strange movements in the house. It didn't happen all the time, only at night, and never before 1 a.m. Since I work from home and usually work late, I'm awake during those hours, and from the window of my study I have a direct view of the house next door. At first, I thought it was something normal. Maybe the former owners were coming back to look for something or to do some maintenance work, but there was no car in the garage or any signs that someone was entering or leaving. One night, around 2 a.m., I saw the lights turn on again, and this time I felt a growing sense of unease. I thought that perhaps someone had broken into the house without permission, so I decided to call the police to be safe. When the officers arrived, they inspected the house from the outside. Since they didn't see any signs of forced entry or anything out of place, they told me they couldn't do much more without the owner's permission. They recommended that I call again if I saw something strange. A few days passed, and everything was calm. But one night, while I was in the kitchen preparing something to eat, I saw the lights in the neighboring house turning on and off in several rooms, as if someone was walking back and forth inside the house. This time, I didn't call the police immediately. I just watched from the window, trying to understand what was happening. As I watched from the window that night, I saw the lights in the neighboring house flickering on and off rapidly in different rooms, as if someone was rushing through the house or some kind of strange activity was taking place. The sequence was erratic. First the kitchen light, then the hallway, followed by the second floor, and finally the attic. It seemed impossible for someone to move so quickly from one room to another, especially in such a large house. Finally, I decided that I needed to record what I was seeing to have proof in case I needed to call the police again. I took out my phone and started recording from the window, focusing on the house as the lights flickered. Just as I began to record, the light in the attic went out, and a shadow appeared in one of the windows. I couldn't clearly distinguish what it was, but there was something strange and disturbing about the figure I saw. My heart was pounding as I tried to focus better, but suddenly my phone stopped recording, and the video was damaged. Desperate to understand what was happening, I called the police again and explained the situation. When the officers arrived, all the lights in the neighboring house were off. They looked at me skeptically, as if they thought I was wasting my time or just imagining things. I tried to show them the video, but the file was corrupted and wouldn't play. One of the officers looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and compassion, and after re-inspecting the exterior of the house without finding anything, they said goodbye and left. Once the officers left, I stayed staring at the house from the window. At that moment, the attic light turned on again and flickered several times, as if someone was sending me some kind of message or even mocking me. I tried to record again with my phone, but every time I did, something went wrong. The files became corrupted, the camera wouldn't focus properly, or I just couldn't capture anything. This repeated over the following nights. Every time I tried to document what I saw, something failed, and I couldn't capture what was happening in the neighboring house. I became filled with frustration and unease, but I decided I couldn't do anything more. Then, one night while trying to sleep, I heard a noise coming from the neighboring house. I got up and went to the window to see if I could distinguish anything. This time, not only did the living room light turn on, but it was shining with a strange reddish hue, as if someone had changed the bulbs to red ones. The light slowly turned off, and right after, I heard a noise at the door of my own house. I ran to the entrance and looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I felt a mix of fear and helplessness. I was convinced that something very strange was happening in the neighboring house, but I didn't know how to proceed. To this day, I haven't been able to get a clear explanation of what I saw, and although the incident seemed to have stopped, I still feel uneasy every time I pass by that house. My name is Sarah, and I am 28 years old. I live with my husband in a house in a big city. Since our house is on a street corner, it's common for people who want to sell things or knock on doors to offer services to end up at our doorstep. Recently, my husband got a new job that required him to fly to Texas and stay at the company's training center for 2 weeks as part of his training. Although I wasn't thrilled about the idea of being home alone for such a long time, I decided it could be an opportunity to do things I normally don't when he's at home. I could cook some dishes he doesn't like and watch those shows he can't stand. I tried to think of it as just 2 weeks for myself and my peace of mind. When he left, I continued with my daily routine. Sometimes I work part-time, only about 20 hours a week, but most of the time I'm at home, cleaning, or just watching TV. One day, while relaxing on the couch, the doorbell rang. At first I thought it was the mailman delivering a package. I heard the glass door open and then close, but I realized the person hadn't left because I didn't hear footsteps moving away. After a few moments, someone knocked on the door again. I'm not very good with strangers, and I prefer to avoid dealing with salespeople or promoters. So I ignored the noise and continued watching my show, hoping they would go away. A few minutes passed and they knocked on the door insistently again. I paused the show and looked through the front window. I saw a man standing at the door, someone I didn't know and who didn't seem to be a neighbor. I decided not to open the door and stood my ground. I watched him wave his hands in the air, clearly annoyed, and then he turned around and left. Although the incident left me with a strange feeling, I decided it wasn't worth thinking about too much, so I let it go and continued my days as if nothing had happened. A few days later, I came home after my workday and started preparing dinner. I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell again. This time, I interrupted what I was doing and went to see who it was. I looked through the windows and recognized the same man from before, but this time, he was accompanied by someone else. The first man, the one who had come twice already, was large and muscular, and actually reminded me a lot of Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. He was tall, had an impressive physique, and was holding a notebook in his hand. The man with him was thinner and shorter, although still a bit taller than me. I approached the door and opened it just a little, enough to ask, "Can I help you with something?" The large man replied, "Yes, we're here to install the security system." Hearing that, I told him that this house was mine, and that I had bought it before marrying my husband. Additionally, we hadn't requested any security system, and I had no appointment scheduled for anything like that. I told them they must be at the wrong address. However, the large man insisted and said, "Surely your husband arranged it before he left." I responded that my husband and I always talk before making any decisions of this kind, and if he had decided to install a security system, he would have definitely informed me. The large man took a form out of his notebook and showed it to me, assuring me that the address was written there and that I could verify it if I wanted. Although I hesitated, I opened the glass door a bit more to look at the form. At that moment, I thought maybe my husband had forgotten to tell me that the installers would come while he was away, as a way to make me feel safer. The form looked normal, like any installation document. The man explained that they just needed to make a few notes to determine where to place the monitors, and that it wouldn't take much time. The thinner man, who had remained silent until that moment, just nodded in agreement. I was feeling increasingly uncomfortable and decided I didn't want to let them in. I told them, "My husband is working, and I don't feel comfortable letting people I don't know into my house when I'm alone." The thinner man showed me identification, saying, "We work for a security company." I tried to stay calm and responded, jokingly, that anyone could make a fake badge. The large man extended his hand towards me, as if trying to push the door, and in a serious voice apologized for the misunderstanding. However, he insisted that they needed to come in to do their job, but I told them I was sorry and that I wasn't interested in their services, asking them to leave. The large man seemed to get annoyed. He began knocking on the door I had left slightly open and gave me a look that made me feel very uncomfortable. Additionally, he glanced inside my living room, as if assessing something. This bothered me since they were being insistent, despite my clearly telling them I wasn't interested in what they were offering. I stood my ground, telling them they had to leave and that, if there was a mistake, we could reschedule an appointment for another day. With a firm motion, I closed the door in their faces and locked it. I stayed at the entrance, looking through the window until I saw them walk away. I watched the street, hoping to see if they got into a car, but they didn't. Instead, both started walking down the street as if they had come on foot. I waited a bit longer, and when I was sure they had left, I sent a message to my husband to ask if he knew anything about these men. He replied that he had no idea who they were or what he was talking about. I became worried and decided to investigate on my own. I looked up the security company's number on Google and called. I explained everything that had happened to the woman who answered. To my surprise, she assured me that her company had not sent anyone to my house, and that there was no record of an appointment scheduled to install a security system at our address. I felt an intense fear and great unease upon hearing that. The woman from the company advised me to call the police and give a statement. I did so, and although the police took note of what had occurred, they told me they couldn't do much due to the limited information I had about the men. I explained that I would be alone at home for at least another week, so they agreed to make patrols around my neighborhood a couple of times a day to check if those men returned. I went back home with a mixture of fear and anxiety. I closed all the doors and windows and tried to stay calm. I attempted to distract myself and forget about the incident, but it wasn't easy. The following week, I had plans to have lunch with my mom in downtown, so I went out for a while. After lunch, I returned home with my friend to hang out. I hadn't met my friend's mother yet, so I introduced her at the entrance, and we stayed outside chatting for a while. While we were talking, an ordinary car pulled up in front of my house. A woman got out, climbed the steps to my entrance, and introduced herself by saying, "Hi, I'm from the security company. Last week we came to install a system, but you didn't let my colleague do it." Her tone surprised me, and I responded, "There must be a mistake because I called your company, and they told me there's no record of an appointment for our address. Who are you really?" I asked her to wait while I called the police to clarify the situation, but as soon as I went to another room to make the call, the woman ran to her car and left quickly. When the police arrived, I told them what had happened, but since I didn't get a chance to see the car's license plate, they said they couldn't do much about it. This incident left me with a feeling of unease that I still can't shake off. I have no idea who those people were or what they really wanted, and since then, they haven't appeared again. My mother and I continue to talk about this strange event, and every time we recall the details, we feel more confused and scared. A few hours ago, during my usual 10-minute break, I was sitting outside on a bench in downtown. I take these moments to disconnect a bit from work and relax. While watching some videos on my phone, I noticed a cyclist stop right in front of me. He was a man carrying a bag full of loose cans of Diet Coke, which seemed strange to me, especially because it was hot, and it didn't seem like the best day to carry so many soda cans. The man looked at me, greeted me with a hello, and although I felt a bit uncomfortable, I returned the greeting so as not to appear rude. Then he started asking me questions. First, he asked how I was doing, and although I didn't intend to talk much, I responded briefly, hoping he would continue on his way. However, instead of leaving, he asked for my name. I made the mistake of telling him my real name without thinking too much about the possible consequences. The man, who introduced himself as James, continued asking me questions. He asked where I worked, and not wanting to give him details about my life, I lied and told him I worked at a nearby breakfast restaurant. I hoped this answer would satisfy him and lead him to continue on his way. However, James didn't seem satisfied. He asked if he could come visit me at work someday, to which I quickly replied no, inventing that I would be going on vacation soon to avoid it. He seemed determined to prolong the conversation, so he took a can of Diet Coke from his bag and offered it to me, saying he could give me another if I wanted. I felt trapped, but politely declined the offer, telling him I didn't drink sodas. I thought this would make him desist, but instead of leaving, he began asking increasingly personal questions. Suddenly, he asked if he looked old to me, which completely caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I said no. He looked at me and said I looked middle-aged, which confused me because I'm just over 20 years old. I didn't understand what he was referring to or what he was aiming for with his comments. Trying to stay calm and polite, I simply thanked him for the compliment and avoided making eye contact, hoping this would convince him to leave. However, his behavior continued to make me uncomfortable. Then he asked if I lived nearby or if I resided in this city. I didn't want to give him more details about my life, so I lied again, telling him I didn't live nearby and that I was just passing through. He kept watching me insistently. To my bad luck, that day I was wearing a t-shirt with the name of my actual workplace printed on the front. At one point, James noticed the shirt, read the name of the place out loud, and mentioned it with a strange smile. Trying not to show nervousness, I quickly responded that I no longer worked there and that I was wearing the shirt only because it was comfortable. At that moment, I felt increasingly uncomfortable. I started searching my phone for a close friend I could ask for help if the situation became even stranger. Finally, one of my friends appeared nearby and came over to greet me. As soon as James noticed someone else nearby, he stopped looking at me, got on his bike, and left without saying another word. I watched him right away, feeling relieved but still somewhat uneasy. After he left, I told my friend what had happened and asked him to stay with me for a while longer since I still felt nervous. I have no idea who James really was or what he wanted. Since that day, I've avoided wearing t-shirts that have the name of my workplace and try to be much more careful when interacting with strangers. I am a 17-year-old boy, and when this happened, my family was at our country house a few miles from here. My sister, who is 21 years old, stayed there with her boyfriend. During the summer, this usually happens frequently, so I am quite used to staying alone at home. I prefer staying here because I work and don't have time to travel back and forth all the time. I like being alone and am not easily scared by the creaks and noises of our old house, as I already know them well. Additionally, having my sister's dog Bosco with me gives me a sense of security. Bosco is a good guard dog and makes me feel protected since he always reacts to any strange sound and barks if he senses something unusual. He barks easily at any noise or if someone passes near the house. This calms me because I know Bosco will alert me if something is wrong. Usually, when he barks, I know it's because someone passed by the alley beside the house or near the glass door. I let him bark for a while because it's usually just that, a passerby or someone near the house, and there's no reason to be alarmed. But one Friday night, his barking around midnight scared me in a different way. That night I was alone as always, but although I usually remain calm, I couldn't help but fear that someone might enter the house uninvited or try to steal. I often ignore his initial barks, thinking he's just reacting to someone on the street. However, this time was different. Bosco's barking didn't stop, and his growling was deeper than usual. He barked and growled for so long that I finally decided to get out of bed in the basement to see what was happening. When I reached the upstairs living room, I saw Bosco standing alert in front of the glass door. His posture was tense, and his barking was more intense than ever. I approached to close the shutters and give him some peace. As I got closer to the door, I noticed something that made me stop dead. The glass door was ajar, maybe 2 to 4 inches. I felt a chill run down my spine realizing this. I knew I had let Bosco out in the morning, but I was also sure I had closed the door properly afterward. I never leave that door unlocked, especially when I'm alone at home. A wave of panic washed over me. Although I tried to calm down and not let fear take over, I couldn't help but wonder if someone else had opened the door. I quickly closed the glass door and locked it, checking twice to ensure it was completely shut. I turned on my phone's flashlight and began to inspect the entire upstairs floor. The house has 3 floors and all the lights were off. I checked the closets and other spaces where someone might hide, trying to reassure myself as I inspected every corner. When I finished checking, I didn't find anything strange or anyone hiding. I felt a bit more at ease and went back to the basement to try to sleep. However, as I tried to calm down and return to normality, I heard the sound of footsteps upstairs, right above my room. I froze. I heard what sounded like footsteps mixed with Bosco moving around the house, but the steps seemed too heavy to be just Bosco's. For a moment I thought I was becoming paranoid, but the fear intensified. I put on my headphones and tried to relax until finally I fell into a light sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard someone upstairs. It was my sister, who had returned home after working late. Just before that, I woke up and noticed that Bosco was in the basement. Something very strange since he never goes down there, and we even have a security door to prevent him from entering. I found him scratching the door to my room in the basement, something he had never done before. I got up to let him out, and at that moment my sister entered. We met at the entrance and agreed that it would be better to let Bosco out through the main door, as we always did, and didn't want to use the glass door. After exchanging a few words, each of us went our separate ways. She went to the bathroom, and I returned to the basement. While we were talking, an ordinary car pulled up in front of my house. A woman got out, climbed the steps to my entrance, and introduced herself by saying, "Hi, I'm from the security company. Last week we came to install a system, but you didn't let my colleague do it." Her tone surprised me, and I responded, "There must be a mistake because I called your company and they told me there's no record of an appointment for our address. Who are you really?" I asked her to wait while I called the police to clarify the situation, but as soon as I went to another room to make the call, the woman ran to her car and left quickly. When the police arrived, I told them what had happened, but since I didn't get a chance to see the car's license plate, they said they couldn't do much about it. This incident left me with a feeling of unease that I still can't shake off. I have no idea who those people were or what they really wanted, and since then, they haven't appeared again. My mother and I continue to talk about this strange event, and every time we recall the details, we feel more confused and scared.